Hi everyone, it's Alex, and today I'm here to do my Litmas Day 3 video, but also to do the book Postscript 2018 tag. So I know that the prompt for Litmas today is the best book I read this year, but I thought I would cheat a little and think of it like the best book for each category of this tag. There are a couple books I have in mind that I plan to read after Christmas, and there's a possibility that that could be the best book I read this year, so I'm trying to really save that just in case. And then that way later I also kind of want to do a top 10 books of 2018 thing later. So I thought combining Litmas and then this tag was a great solution. This tag was created by Adam at Memento Mori, and I was tagged by Lukash at Totally Pretentious. And the first question asks, what is the longest book I read this year and it took the longest to finish? For me, that was definitely The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton. I read it through the month of October, but I also think it was like the perfect amount of spacing to read. I think it was probably like 200 pages every week, and that sounds like a lot, but really, I don't know, it just really went by for me, and I really liked the experience reading it over a month. I thought it would really drag on, but it really didn't for me. I really enjoyed that book. Question 2 asks a book outside my comfort zone that I read this year, and that would actually probably be Someday This Pain Will Be Useful to You, and I don't remember the author's name, but I'll put the picture here. I think the reason this book was uncomfortable to me is because this is, I think, the only YA-ish book I read this year, because it talks about a boy living in New York the summer before he goes to Brown, and it takes place in 2003, and it was published in 2007, and I think it's remarkable how this author, Peter Cameron, now that I remember it, Peter Cameron wrote about this boy, the protagonist, that obviously has a lot of this, what we may define today as millennial dread. But also what I think is more interesting is that since this is taking place in 2003 New York City, I expected the book to really sort of point me towards this sense of post 9/11 adolescence and what that means, and I kind of got hints of that, but I don't know if it was intentional. And I think it's, for me, the reason that's uncomfortable is because I think I'm so used to reading now with the mindset that things are always trying to talk to me in a book or sort of point me in themes that I'm trying to get the jump on. But I really don't think this book was trying to do that, at least with the thoughts I had in mind. And I think because of that, I know that this book, if I had read it while in high school, I would have loved it. But now, as I've gotten older, I couldn't relate to it as much anymore. And I think the reason that made me sort of uncomfortable is because knowing that even now that I think about it, the books I read and enjoy in my 20s, it might be that in my 30s and 40s, I may not like it as much. Question 3 asks, how many books did I reread this year? And I sort of reread 3. The Liars Club by Mary Karr, The Lonely City by Olivia Lang, and A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Question 4 is a jumping point from question 3, and it asks what was my favorite reread this year, and that was A Little Life, mainly because, again, thinking similarly to Someday This Pain Will Be Useful to You, this book, even now 3 years apart from when I read it, was a very different reading experience for me. And the reason it's my favorite reread is because with this book, reading it, it's a very long book, if you guys don't know. And A Little Life, I think, it's really weird because when I reread something, it's like the first time I read it, it was like I helped shape writing it, which isn't true at all because I'm not responsible for that. But I have these constant thoughts about how did I shape my perception of reading it the first time, and how does that conflict with myself being older now? But question 5 asks, what's a book I'm looking forward to rereading in the future that I read this year? And that would definitely be Educated by Tara Westover. I don't know if I was a bit too strong towards this book, because I think I'm in the minority where I sort of had problems with it. Like, I didn't seem to be swept up by it as like many other people. For me, it's because I know that we all love a good triumphal story where things work out in the end, but there were these writing mechanics or writing strategies that Tara Westover did that I think was evident that she's not experienced being a writer. And some parts that I think about is when she describes her brother. You know the brother I'm talking about if you've read the book, but it's like at the end of chapters she would remind us or give these sort of Scooby-Doo hints at her brother's behavior and how that affects her, and I don't really need to be spoon-fed that as a reader. But since I've read it, a lot of other people have been reading it after, because I think I read that very shortly after it was released. I can't really remember, but I really want to reread it. I think my opinion of it has changed a bit based on reviews I've watched, so I'm really looking forward to rereading that at some point. Question 6 asks, what's my favorite single short story or novella that I read this year? And that would be, it's in The Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri, and it's a short story called Sexy. It's a great short story. I thought of it immediately as I read this question, so if you haven't read Interpreter of Maladies, especially that story, it's really wonderful. I read that maybe in May, and I feel like I read a lot of short story collections this year, but I think that's one of my favorite stories, definitely. So now we have questions 7 and 8, and this is like the questions I thought were the most endearing to me in this tag, because this is actually how I often think of my impressions of books about. So for question 7, for example, it says, Mass Appeal, a book I read this year that I liked and would recommend to a wide variety of readers. And this is going to be a bit contradictory on my part, but I'm actually going to say Autobiography of a Face by Lucy Greeley. This is also a memoir, similar in the same vein as Educated, although completely different stories. But Autobiography of a Face is about Lucy Greeley's coming of age, childhood to adolescence, and adulthood with having to deal with a disfigurement on her face and growing up and feeling alienated. And I think the reason I like this so much, and I'd recommend it to people, is because this doesn't sugarcoat, or Lucy Greeley does not hold back or withhold her feelings about how she felt feeling so isolated from people. And it's even more interesting because Lucy Greeley's family and some friends she's had, they've responded to this memoir by saying some things were very dramatized or fabricated, and it's so interesting with the power of memoir how we're able to articulate our own memories. But while I was reading it, Autobiography of Face, it felt all true to me, whereas when I read Educated, I felt like Tara Westover was thinking too much about how will a reader understand what happened to me, versus Autobiography of Face is about, this is what happened to me, take it or leave it. Yeah, it's a great memoir. I highly recommend it. And question 8 says, Specialized Appeal, a book I liked but would be hesitant to recommend to just anyone, and that would be The Idiot by Elif Botman. It's really interesting with this because The Idiot was shortlisted for the Pulitzer whatever year it was out, and usually with prize-winning contenders that I've read, I usually find that that's the one, that's the mass appeal, and that's the reason why I may not like it as much, because I think it's trying to be too likable, like All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr or Less by Andrew Sean Greer. But with The Idiot, I just loved it so much when I read it this year. I think I read it in like February or even January, but it's definitely one of my favorite books of the year. There's something about Celine, who's our protagonist in The Idiot, as she's experiencing her life in Harvard, and I've seen a lot of people feel turned off mass appeal-wise by this book because they think another story about someone going to Harvard is very elitist, but Celine, she's Turkish-American, so there's also a lot about, you know, how do we prioritize our personhood, and while also seeking out or identifying or noticing our privilege. And there was even a romantic subplot happening in The Idiot, which I thought would totally turn me off, but I it was so good. Like, I loved it. It felt so realistic, and the whole, like, will they, won't they, didn't feel cheap. It felt so sincere, and then Celine travels, and she makes friends, and there's this whole conversation about fate, and I actually have a review of The Idiot on my channel, that you guys can watch. I'll link it down below. But yeah, that is such a good book. That is definitely my answer for this question. Question 9, or really not even a question, but it just says, reflect on your year as a bookish content creator. And I think this year for me, I think especially towards the second half of this year, I became a lot more confident in what I have to say on BookTube, and just really feeling secure in my own thoughts and ideas about books. And my hope for 2019 is that one of them is of course that whole interviewing idea that I mentioned in one of my last videos, the identity tag, where I would love to interview some booktubers I subscribe to and have that sort of conversation, because I feel like reading is a craft, kind of like what I talked about rereading. Whenever I felt like I've read something for the first time, I feel like I helped write that, or helped in the writing process somehow, which doesn't really make sense, but I really see reading as its own sort of form, and I think people can do it so differently, and I think that's something to talk about, and I think people on BookTube have such valuable things to say, and I really want to expose that. And thinking of 2019 and the year ahead, this will be kind of hard to explain, but with reading this year, you know, reading, especially now as I look at my books over here, it's really weird. I have this weird idea in my mind that reading is always something I'm wondering, is reading something like something I have as a reward for something I've done? Because now when I look at all the books I have, I think about how right now I live in an apartment with one of my very good friends, and I know that it's a bit strange of me to think that I can have all these books as if like I can willingly keep taking them with me at different places I'm gonna live, and it makes me wonder, like, who am I to think I have so much time to read or can read when there's so much in my life that I feel like doesn't really settle me to be able to see reading the way I hope to, if that makes sense. Basically, I would love to see myself reading in a house I know I'm gonna stay in forever. Maybe if I was living with someone, and my life being much more together than it is now. And I really wonder if I use reading, because I feel like most people, they use reading as the secondary when they can find time for it to unwind. But this year I've really noticed I'm using reading as a priority, almost to the point of where I'm using it to distract me from my real life priorities that I should be thinking about, and I don't think that's okay. I really don't know if I'm using reading as an illusion of progress that I hope to make in my life. When I really look at it, of course reading has helped me mentally and like feeling like I'm growing as a person, but do I really have time for that right now, to be thinking of that stuff when I should be thinking about other things, about where to sort of, because right now in my life I don't want to be the same, I want to keep growing, and within the past few years I feel like I haven't really taken the leaps that I would have liked to make that happen. And reading a lot, or reading more in a way, is me preventing myself, I think, from like consciously thinking of making that kind of progress where there are real outcomes in the real world versus progress in my personhood and me as a human being. And that's to say, I think, like when I tell people I read a lot, I think I foolishly equate that as reading a lot of things I haven't read before. So I think in 2019, I actually think I'm gonna read less of things I haven't read before and just reread books I already have, because I don't feel like I'm in a position to constantly let myself have the opportunity to read new things, which sounds so silly, but of course, like whatever, I don't know. I don't really know what I'm saying, but yeah, I'm not really sure what will happen in 2019, like based on my thoughts that I'm having like this, but I don't know. Maybe it's just the end of year where I feel insecure about progress, but yeah, that's my answer to that question. And finally, part 10, or question 10, it says to tag some fellow book creators or content creators. There are two people I want to mention that I subscribed to very recently, and that is Remembered Reads and Bookish. I really like their channels a lot. I'm glad to have found them. And then I'll tag some other people down below as well that Adam hasn't already tagged. So yeah, I'm sorry this wasn't Vlogmasy today. My only real plans, I think, is to go over to a friend's and play a video game that just came out, Super Smash Brothers. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. I'm apparently very good at it. I play all the female characters because I'm progressive, and they're apparently bad characters, but somehow I just keep winning. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.